Good evening. Welcome to Wanderlust Wednesdays. My name is Joost Ouendag, and tonight I'm going to be talking about the Grand European Tour, the granddaddy of all of our river cruises, if you will. And as we always do, we will start off with a brief introductory video.
This ultimate 15-day cruise highlights Europe from Amsterdam in the Netherlands all the way to Budapest in Hungary. Start in charming Amsterdam. Visit Cologne's Gothic Cathedral. Sample wine in the Rhine Valley's heartland and learn about glass-blowing traditions in Wertheim. Plus, you'll wander the cobblestone streets of Passau, stroll the boulevards of Vienna, and finish your cruise in Budapest.
So that was a little start, a little taste, and now I resume for you the Grand European Tour from Amsterdam to Budapest. That is the direction that I will be talking about tonight. A 15-day cruise with 12 guided tours that travels through 4 countries. And if you want, you can actually add maybe a number 5 if you do a little extension with us, but we'll get to that. This gives you a layout of the entire itinerary. You arrive in Amsterdam, your first full day is in the Netherlands, and then on day 3 you're in Cologne, day 4 in Koblenz, where the Moselle and the Rhine come together. Day 5 and 6 and 7 you are spending on the Rhine River. It's a very windy river. On day 8 you're in Nuremberg. And on day 9 in Regensburg, then Passau, you're almost now in Germany. Passau sits on the German-Austrian border. So you're almost in Austria, I should say. And day 11 is in the Wachau Valley. You're in Melk. Day 12 and 13 are in Vienna, Austria's capital. And finally, you end in Hungary's capital, Budapest. And this is a map that shows you what that looks like. So from Amsterdam to Budapest, across the face of Western and Central Europe, if you will. And all along the way, when we take you off the ship, we offer shore excursions, and many of those have what we call the Viking Way ingredients. It's essentially the way we like you to experience your destinations. If an excursion has local life aspects to it, that basically means that we want you to experience things the way that the locals do. We want you to rub elbows with the people that live in the port that you're visiting. In this particular scenario, for instance, you can go on a hike from Miltenberg to the neighboring town of Freudenberg, and there you will visit a local family in their backyard, where you can shoot the breeze, where you can find out what it is that they're up to in their daily lives, and so on and so forth. Or you go with one of our chefs or a local chef to see what people find in the marketplace and what they then find on the table. It's a very interesting way of exploring a local culture through food, obviously. And finally, and this is a big one on the Amsterdam to Budapest cruise, when you're tired after 2 weeks of traveling with us, you can soak in the healing waters of one of Budapest's spas. And that is certainly, almost in the most literal sense of the word, rubbing elbows with the locals, because this is a tradition that is centuries old. It's actually rumored that this is why the Romans built a city right there where we now find the city of Budapest, because of the healing waters that they found there. Some of the oldest remnants of Budapest are Roman spas, if you will. Then we also want you to have an experience of where we bring you closer to the working world. You know, simply put, how do people make a living? What do they do on a daily basis when they go to work? And in the Netherlands, obviously, we will take you to a farm. There's very little that is as Dutch as cheese. We, often called Gouda cheese, but Gouda is really just a city where we bring the cheese to then distribute it all over the country. The city of Gouda itself actually doesn't produce cheese. It's a market more than anything else. And we will show you what a farmer has to do in the 21st century to produce cheese. We take you to a gentleman who for years already, and by now for decades, has brought wine, his wine, to our ships. So it's the gentleman that you can drink the Grüne Veltliner from while you're traveling with us. And then over the years, we have developed relationships with institutions, with people that allow us to go a little bit further than your regular visit. I'll give you an example in Kinderdijk, where we have sponsored a ship that is virtually exclusively for Viking, where we take you to a mill that is not normally visited. It's the oldest one in Kinderdijk. In Cologne, we will take you, and it's only for a select group. There's only so many people that fit in the elevator, but we take you to a service elevator and we bring you to the roof of Cologne Cathedral. And in the Wachau Valley, we take you to a Benedictine abbey that we've worked with to give you a sense of what life is like on a working, functioning 21st century abbey. So in order to find your way across shore excursions, as you go and look on our website, or you look in My Viking Journey, which is the portal that you get access to when you book a cruise with us, we have all these little icons that simply quickly help you to identify the things that you would like to do. They also help you, and if you look at that second column, we're talking about an activity level. It helps you pace yourself a little bit. There will be days where you're going to be busy and where you want to map out for yourself a very active day, and then there may be a day where you want to take it a little easier. And that's where the activity levels come in very, very handy. The features of these shore excursions themselves obviously are very straightforward. Some of them include meals, some of them include snacks. Keep in mind that as long as we are working with the limitations that COVID brings us, there will be some modifications in the shore excursions as you book them. Keep in the back of your head that as soon as it is safe to do so, we will operate our entire program as we had it intended. And we're all looking forward to being able to do that. But again, we have to weigh your safety with your freedom to walk about the countries as you please. Before you get going on the Grand European Tour, we would allow you to maybe spend some time to catch your breath after the transatlantic flight and maybe see a little bit more of the Netherlands before you get started. In Amsterdam, we offer 2 nights additionally to what you have on the cruise. And keep in mind, when you arrive in Amsterdam, you usually do so early in the morning. So there is some time to explore on the day of embarkation. The next day finds you in Kinderdijk. So on the cruise itself, you have 3/4 of a day or so. So it's worth your while adding those 2 extra nights. You could also spend some time in The Hague, not the capital city, but the residence of the Dutch government. And the picture that you see here is the Peace Palace. The Hague has a number of international institutions that had put it on the map beyond the borders of the country. It is also the city where you find the Mauritshuis Museum, and that has one of the most famous paintings by a Dutch master, in this case Frans Hals, who painted the girl with the pearl earring. And that's on display in the Mauritshuis. And then before we get really started on the cruise itself, this is Literature Week, and that is a perfect opportunity for me to point you in the direction of our resources tab on the website, where we give you all kinds of advice about books that you could read before you travel. We realize that you have quite a bit of time living in anticipation. Many of our guests book our cruises months out, and in preparation and in anticipation, you could watch some movies. We have some great movie tips. We also have a reading list. And obviously, as you travel from Amsterdam to Budapest, there is an awful lot of great literature that we take you through on this journey. In Amsterdam, obviously the most famous book that comes out of the Netherlands, especially to an English-speaking audience, is very likely The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. And what you see in the next image is the house where Anne Frank and her family hid during World War II before they were betrayed. Still not quite understood by whom, but they were betrayed and then deported, and Anne Frank died in Bergen-Belsen. But she left behind her diary of the years that she spent hidden away from the Nazis, and it's probably the best known work surprisingly on the English-speaking market of World War II and the Jewish experience in World War II. The image that you see on the right-hand side is also quite interesting. That is the National Library of Vienna. And Vienna had, of course, a host of famous authors. Arthur Schnitzler, a playwright, lived in Vienna. Joseph Roth, an author who also wrote about the experience of 20th century Vienna and the aftermath of World War II. Joseph Roth was Jewish. But Vienna, even if you don't want to read any books in preparation of going to Vienna, that library, if you have a little bit of time, it has such a spectacular insight. It's a temple of books. Another temple of books you will find in the library in Melk Abbey. Again, for hundreds of years, of course, abbeys and monasteries were repositories of books. And the Library of Melk Abbey is certainly one of the most beautiful in the world. Nuremberg is a great city, a great literary city. I'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about Nuremberg. The authors like Sebastian Brandt and Hans Sachs. Cologne had Heinrich Böll, the man who in 1972 won a Nobel Prize for Literature. So there's an awful lot that you could read about the destinations that you travel to by very, very famous, very accomplished authors. And before we then completely dive into it, one more thing: when is the best time to go? And I'm going to give you a boring answer that might not help you right off the bat. You can travel on the Grand European Tour from March until November, and it's always a great experience. And let's start with March. You will have a chance still to catch the tulips in Amsterdam before you get started. You can catch the flower season in the Netherlands, and further down the river, it will not be all that crowded yet. In early April, the temperatures will be relatively accommodating. You bring a little raincoat because it will rain on occasion, but it's a perfect time of year to travel. In summer, of course, everything is open. You'll have a lot of sunshine. If that gets a little too warm for you, you wait until September or so, and then in October, you'll need that coat again. It's going to rain a little bit, but then you're not far away from having Christmas markets, and that is a whole new attraction all by itself. There are some Grand European tours that we have in Christmas market season, and of course we have dedicated Christmas market cruises, but that's not what we're talking about today. So let's get on with the Grand European Tour then. And as I mentioned, we start in Amsterdam. You'll have a little bit of time upon arrival, and I would use that time. They always say that the best way to overcome a jet lag is to fall into the rhythm of the destination that you're in. So try to stay up a little bit. Don't go to bed at 2 o'clock in the afternoon or even earlier when your stateroom is ready. And we try to get those ready as quickly as we possibly can. But resist the temptation. Go out, explore Amsterdam a little bit. Walk the canals. It's such an accessible, it's such a walkable city. Peek into one of the cafes, sit down, have a glass of Genever, which is the Dutch gin, and don't be embarrassed. You'll get it, and the glass will be completely full, so that you don't have any other choice but to kind of bend down and slurp the top little bit out of the glass. That's exactly how you're supposed to do it. This is not an overzealous innkeeper that tries to serve you more than you should have. It's just how we do it. Then, as I mentioned, you could catch the tulip season in the second half of March. Sometimes a little early if you travel in the third week of March. If you want to make absolutely certain that you have good tulips in Holland, you need to travel first week of April. And this goes until about the second week of May or so. This is a picture, obviously, of the Keukenhof. If you're in Amsterdam, do not miss some of the museums. And the neat thing in Amsterdam is that you have 3 stellar museums that are all next to each other. There is the Van Gogh Museum. There is the Rijksmuseum, that is basically, if you will, the Museum of Fine Art for all of the Netherlands. And it covers the Dutch masters all the way to Mondrian and Rietveld, the Cubist style. And it tells you also the history of the Netherlands. It explains why there was such a cultural bloom in the 16th and 17th centuries in the Netherlands. So it's a very integrated story that the Rijksmuseum tells. And then there's the Stedelijk Museum, which is the Municipal Museum of Amsterdam, that also has a stellar collection of primarily contemporary art. You then travel to Kinderdijk. That's day 2 of this itinerary. And in Kinderdijk, we offer you a choice of excursions where you can travel to one of the mills, as I mentioned, in this converted freight boat that we helped restore. It's a 19th century freight boat that will take you to a windmill that is not normally visited. You can do the, if you will, the traditional visit of Kinderdijk. You can also hop on a bicycle if that is what you would like to do. And then there's a way to travel from Kinderdijk to a nearby community in the Alblasserwaard. And the Alblasserwaard is a region of the Netherlands, relatively small region. On the far end of the Alblasserwaard, you have a cheese farm that we take you to. And there we do things the Viking way. This is not a made for tourism cheese farm. This is just a working operation. If it just so happens that you walk into a stable, your nostrils are going to have that experience that you have when you get in close proximity with cows. You get to taste the cheese, of course, and you get to learn about what it takes in a hard day's work for a cheese farmer to produce what then gets eaten and sold in the markets in the Netherlands and way beyond the Netherlands around the world. All of the cheeses that you see here, for instance, they will turn yellow eventually. That traditional, you know, that kind of color that you expect of a Gouda cheese on the outside. In the afternoon, you may sit in on a lecture about the Dutch masters. This is an image that shows you a painting by Jan Steen. Jan Steen was a moralist. He was a painter of the 17th century, and he tried to teach his fellow citizens important life lessons. And it would go into too much detail. You see that if you look a little closer, you can see that especially the children here are up to no good. And so the painting was somewhat of a cautionary tale. That boy that sits there smokes a pipe. The kid all the way to the left that is throwing things on the floor. And then there's a girl in the background that is trying to probably put her hand in the cookie jar. Jan Steen wanted to tell people, don't do this, don't do that. But he then depicted all the things that people weren't supposed to do. And that made his paintings so much fun to watch. There's always a lot going on in his paintings. Next day, we're in Cologne. And Cologne is one of Germany's liveliest cities with long traditions. Sadly, it was also a very important city during World War II, and it got thoroughly destroyed, especially in the latter days in the latter years of the war. But the cathedral is still there, and Cologne Cathedral, or the Dome, as the residents of Cologne call it, is one of the most spectacular Gothic churches you'll ever see. It's huge. It was built over the span of 600 years. So there are some really old bits and pieces and some 20th century pieces as well. And one of the real highlights, and again, this is for a small group only, and you cannot have any kind of vertigo or any problem with heights. We can take you to the roof of Cologne Cathedral on an experience that gives you a very, very unique perspective of this cathedral. And it's not just the roof as on the outside. You also get into galleries that were used by workmen that are way up under the roof of the cathedral that allow you to look inside the church. It's one of my very, very favorite things to do. Anytime I'm in Cologne, I try to talk to the lady that does this for us and say, hey, do you have some time? I can never get enough of it. It's just a splendid experience. But even just on the ground, it's Cologne is quite an experience. The great thing in the evening is that we take you behind this, or we take you to the local life that plays out in the pubs. They're not called pubs in Cologne, they're called Brauhäuser. And basically, these are pubs that can only sell the beer that's brewed on the premises. And we teach you exactly how to order your beer. You don't really have to order, because as long as your glass is there and as soon as it's empty, it gets replaced by another glass. So we will teach you how to no longer order beer to make sure that you can walk out self-propelled out of the Brauhaus. There's a trick to it. It's very simple. You really need to cover your glass with a little coaster. Otherwise, it gets replenished over and over and over again. There's a little video that will show you that gives you a much better idea than I can paint in words of what Cologne is like.
In the 12th century, Cologne was a quiet city. That is until the day their Archbishop Reinald von Dassel brought home an incredible treasure from Italy. The bones of the biblical three wise men. This remarkable relic required an extraordinary home of worship. So they built on the city's most spiritual site.
The place where Cologne Cathedral stands is a very, very old place to held services. In the year 313, Bishop Maternus do the services with the Christians. So over 1800 years, this place is used for the church.
With location in hand, the foundation stone for the Cologne Cathedral was laid. Construction progressed at an incredible pace, a rate that legend has it was due to a bet the architect made with the devil. Desperate for fame, he offered the souls of himself and his family for the cathedral's inspired drawings, but only if the devil could build it in record time. Luckily, the story goes, his wife discovered the bet and with cleverness halted the project short of completion, thwarting the devil. But the haunting silhouette of the unfinished cathedral tainted the skyline for nearly 4 centuries. It's been said the French invasion of 1794 and their use of the cathedral as a stable was key to reigniting interest in the project. Finally, in 1880, the tallest twin-spired church in the world was complete. Outside, this exquisite cathedral embodies the artistic spirit of Gothic architecture. But it's inside that the level of detail becomes nearly overwhelming.
The ceiling is so high. Cologne Cathedral has the third highest walls in the world. You have to imagine that the craftsmen work here 700 years ago with so less technical supporting systems. The working process is very painful and very impressive.
The cavernous nave with its 142-foot high ceiling easily accommodates nearly 90,000 square feet of stained glass, while providing an eternal setting in which to worship the golden reliquary of the three wise men. Exploring behind the scenes, I discovered a side of this architectural masterpiece most people miss. In the blink of an eye, you're in the midst of a hand-carved forest of spires. It's an unusual perspective, a bird's-eye view of artistic elements, where you can examine structural features like the flying buttresses supporting the enormous walls, and ponder the reason behind the cathedral's menacing characters.
There are spitting gargoyles at the edges of the cathedral. We know that those gargoyles frightened the visitors in the medieval times. Inside of the cathedral, they see all the angel figures, the gold and the paradise symbols. So the visitors, they are happy, praying and doing the services.
Stepping inside the iconic roof, I was surprised to find it's supported by what was, at the time, cutting-edge technology.
Cologne Cathedral has no wood construction under the plates of the outside. There is metal construction from the year 1855 to 1860, and is one of the biggest metal construction you can see in Europe in the 19th century.
Hidden within this jungle of iron, I came across yet another treasure. An eerie pathway barely wide enough for a single person. It encircles the heart of the cathedral at a considerable height, passing at times within inches of the beautiful stained glass, eventually leading to a vantage point very few have enjoyed, one that instantly took my breath away.
The craftsmen are still working on the cathedral. We reconstruct and restore the cathedral. 100 craftsmen work here every day, 365 days a year, and it will never stop.
Thanks to an abundance of loving care, the Cologne Cathedral has so far escaped the ravages of time and remains an architectural masterpiece certainly worth exploring. I hope you too will do what I did and immerse yourself in this Rhine treasure, listening for the stories these stones can tell.
Then you move on and you will find yourself in Koblenz. And this is a perfect image to describe a little bit what we do in Koblenz. You're at the northern end of the Rhine River Gorge. And as you can see in the background here, and I'll show you on the next slide a picture that goes a little bit more into detail, this is a fortress that overlooks the confluence of the Moselle and the Rhine Rivers. This is Fortress Ehrenbreitstein, and one of the excursions we offer from Koblenz is a visit to Ehrenbreitstein. You can also just stay in town and have a look around. This gives you an idea of what Koblenz itself looks like. And then the included excursion goes to the Maaksburg. And now you're a little further into the Rhine River Gorge, and this gives you a really good idea of what the landscape here looks like. And all along the river here, you find these beautiful, lovely castles that sit atop these hills overlooking a segment of the river. In medieval times, it was the duty of the lord of the castle to maintain a path along the river, to also clear obstacles from that river to make sure that there was reasonable traffic possible on the Rhine River. And of course, this in return allowed the lords of the manors to charge a little fee. That soon got out of hand, and that's when you start hearing the stories of the robber barons that lived along the Rhine that basically did the very minimal necessary to maintain river traffic and then ended up fleecing the captains at every twist and turn. And there were a few dozen castles on a relatively short stretch. So you can imagine that it wasn't all that easy for a captain to navigate up and down that river. At least he had to have a good bag filled with coins for the lords of the castles along the Rhine. Today, the Maaksburg is the best preserved castle. These lords of the castles were not always friendly with each other, and that basically means that quite a few of them over the centuries got destroyed. The Maaksburg castle is not one of them. Let's watch a little video that tells you the story of the Maaksburg.
centuries, Marksburg defended the Rhine at Braubach. Perched 90 meters above the water, virtually no activity on the river escaped detection. The castle dates to 1231, a time when the German Empire was split into small principalities, earldoms and dominions. It was the High Middle Ages, a period when nearly 25,000 castles were built in Germany.
Everyone had to enclose his territory and secure it against neighbors who were perhaps not so friendly.
Gegenüber dem Nachbarn, der vielleicht nicht freundlich gesinnt war.
Marksburg was no exception. Towering over the Rhine, it was an intimidating, utterly unassailable sentinel. Even now, you can almost hear the echoes of well-trained soldiers and brave knights on horseback, relentlessly patrolling, ready to defend the castle's 4 gates. Time proved Marksburg impenetrable. With the castle's location and extreme defensive ramparts, it's little wonder that after 8 centuries, including an attack in World War II, Marksburg still stands as the only Rhine castle, never to have been conquered.
The idea of attacking Marksburg was so daunting, most armies quietly passed by. So the castle was usually defended by just 10 to 15 people during the Middle Ages.
Im Mittelalter.
Those invited into Marksburg discovered the castle was anything but opulent. Instead, life here was relatively Spartan. The original owners were the powerful lords of Epstein, while characters like John the Belligerent and Count Johann the Warlike, who was the last aristocrat to occupy Marksburg, played a large part in shaping the castle as it exists today. While there are no ghosts here, Marksburg does have an eerie tale.
Legend has it, the first count's daughter was set to marry a knight. That is until Saint Mark appeared. In the castle's tiny chapel, his spirit became visible and he revealed the knight was actually in league with the devil. Eternally grateful, the castle was renamed Marksburg. That's the only supernatural event that we know of.
Von denen wir wissen.
In the early 19th century, the castle fell into Napoleon's hands and he gifted it to the Duchy of Nassau. Then, in 1900, the German Castles Association, a private heritage foundation, bought Marksburg to preserve and protect it. Today, this stunning icon is home to a different kind of treasure. An immaculate collection of armament fit for a fortress such as this. More than 2,000 years of shaped steel and chainmail documenting the evolution of armor.
Life along the river has changed a lot with the centuries, but towering Marksburg Castle stands strong. It's an impeccable time capsule here on the Rhine.
Sei Dank schneit es nicht so oft hier am Rhein.
I hope you too will do what I did and immerse yourself in this Rhine treasure, listening for the stories this remarkable castle can tell.
And then this is another castle. It's a little further upriver again, so further to the south in this case. This castle is short called Katz, cat. Officially, this castle was the castle of the Count of Katzenelnbogen. And of course, that is a very complicated German name. It literally means cat's elbows. Yes, it's a little bit of a strange name. A little further upriver yet, around the corner in this sharp bend that you see in the background, and that is the Lorelei Rock, you see this castle. This also has a beautiful name. This castle is called Pfalzgrafenstein. It's basically the castle that sits on a rock, Stein, in the middle of the river. So this, you don't get any closer to a castle as you travel along the rivers of Europe. This is as close as you can get. And it was the castle of the Count Palatinate, and that is the Pfalzgraf. That's where the name comes from. And this is yet another castle. I believe this is Sunek, although sometimes I mix up my castles. This stretch, mile by mile, is probably, for really good reasons, the quintessential river experience in all of Europe to be had. And the interesting part is this was part of the European tour, the Grand European Tour. This became a tradition, especially for young British gentlemen. It was considered part of their education to travel all over Europe and see the sites of antiquity. So travel all the way to Athens and look at and Rome, and look at all the culture on the way. Quite often these gentlemen started by crossing the Channel, going to Paris, then crossing either the Alps, and they would bypass the Rhine, but quite often they would travel due east, get on a ship, and then travel up the Rhine, end up in Basel in Switzerland, and from there then cross the Alps, do Italy and Greece. And Lord Byron, the great British author, he was one of the people that popularized this theme of the Grand European Tour. So again, the Middle Rhine was written about and sung about, and had a lot of poems written about it ever since the 17th century. Inspired a lot of poets and authors. Victor Hugo, for instance, the French author, also wrote about his experiences here. And the grandest German author, who really did a lot to popularize not just the Rhine, but also the Grand European Tour, was, of course, Goethe, or as the Germans like to call him, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. All right, this is another castle, and we'll move on to show you a little video of what the romantic Middle Rhine looks like in moving pictures.
In Germany, the River Rhine cuts through steep hillsides and craggy cliffs to reveal quaint villages of half-timbered houses around every bend. This 80-mile stretch between Bingen and Bonn makes up the Middle Rhine, but the area is more affectionately known as the Romantic Rhine. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, this idyllic setting inspired Rhine Romanticism, an artistic movement during which artists decried industrialization and turned instead to nature and the past for inspiration. Writers, painters, and composers, Lord Byron, William Turner, and Richard Wagner among them, journeyed along this sublime waterway, coming away forever changed by the experience. This historic river inspired such works as Wagner's The Ring Cycle, Heine's poem The Lorelei, and some of Turner's finest landscapes, the result of several voyages along the Rhine. In 2002, a portion of the Middle Rhine was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site, in part because of its more than 40 medieval castles, such as Rheinstein Castle, once home to Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf von Habsburg, 12th century Starleck Castle, built by the Archbishops of Cologne, and Marksburg, the only Rhine castle never conquered. Even more intriguing is Pfalzgrafenstein, a toll station built on an island in the middle of the river. Chains once stretched from this island across the entire Rhine. In order to pass, one had to pay a toll, a major source of medieval revenue for the castle landowners. This majestic waterway, long the domain of knights and princes, painters and poets, offers a fascinating window into the past, as well as some of the world's most spectacular vistas. The next time you're in Europe, I hope you'll take the opportunity to explore the romantic Middle Rhine for yourself.
And after that, you will find yourself, we turn the corner into the Rhine River. The Rhine River takes its time. The Rhine, if you think about rivers in terms of traffic, the Rhine is really an interstate highway, a motorway. There's a lot of traffic there. The Rhine is much slower. It takes its time. If you look at a German map, you will see that it really winds its way very, very slowly across the face of Germany. It kind of cuts the country into a northern and a southern half. This is an image of the city of Miltenberg, and this is a second image of Miltenberg. You now start to enter, if you will, storybook Germany. And with storybook Germany, of course, also comes the bratwurst. And there are, you may have had an Oktoberfest where you live and you have bratwurst, and they tend to be of one sort. But the Germans have made bratwurst into an art form. And before I go any further, we'll show you Karina's experience with cooking with bratwursts.
In Nuremberg's medieval district, I'm off to taste some of Germany's most loved foods. I'm here with my friend Tom from Nuremberg, and you're going to tell us a little bit about typical German sausages.
Yeah, and I love my German food. Look at that. What is very specific are these little tiny sausages. When they close the gates at night, they're supposed to go through the keyhole. The poor outside can eat the nice Nuremberg sausages. You get them on a tin plate normally, and when you have them to go, you get them on a bun. But when you have them in the restaurant, you should definitely try the German bread. Very tasty, very healthy.
These look like American pretzels.
They are an invention from Germany. We have paintings in Germany from the 12th century showing them already. It's also a symbol of the bakeries in Germany. It's fantastic. You get this in every corner. You should definitely try that.
Okay, with a sausage.
And you can eat it on a fork. This is how they served this in the Middle Ages. We have also paintings from that day showing people with a fork and a sausage and a pretzel. Enjoy.
Okay, so one bite of each. Double-fisted eating.
So you can also eat the sausages with potato salad, and you can also have sauerkraut with this. Very
We have
German.
sauerkraut with everything in Germany.
Actually, we
Almost.
have.
Yeah.
We have. And we have, this is much bigger than the tiny Nuremberg ones. These are Franconian sausages.
They're black.
Yeah, they're black because they are smoked,
Okay.
which gives a very nice taste. Or you try these ones, which are very, very spicy, but also tasty.
Okay, can I try one of those?
Yes, you can actually.
And do you have to peel away the black skin, or is the
No,
whole sausage black?
No, you can eat it with the skin. You don't have to peel it away.
Okay.
It's nice. It looks weird, but it's tasty. Yeah. Try it. It's nice.
But it's not black all the way through.
No. It's
very
only
good.
the skin because it's smoked. But it's tasty. And here's the various types of mustard. We've got a sweet one, we've got a regular one, and one with estragon. Or you also can try the horseradish, but that is very spicy. Try this with a traditional Nuremberg sausage.
And you literally dip the sausage
You can
in the
do that.
horseradish. It's a little difficult to get it to stick, but all right. And since I'm not a big fan of horseradish, you can tell me what it tastes like.
I could live on that every day. And now we finish it up with a nice German beer. I've got a wheat beer here, and this is a light beer.
And I'll take the light, you'll take the wheat. Yeah. Prost, skål.
Prost, as we say in German.
Prost.
So bratwursts are had in all kinds of shapes and sizes, basically from the moment you hit, I would say, Würzburg, that you see here in the images, all the way down to when you get into Austria. The Austrians do eat bratwurst, but they also have a lot of other delicacies. You're now in bratwurst country, if you will. What you see here is the chapel that belongs to the building that you see on the right-hand side. This is the palace of the Prince Bishop of Würzburg. These Prince Bishops in the Baroque period, so the 17th and 18th centuries, these were men that were not just men of the cloth, they were also worldly rulers. They had a lot of power, a lot of influence, a lot of money, and they built these palatial mansions. They also built the fortress that you will see in the next picture. And they left all this architectural heritage in Würzburg, and that is what makes Würzburg such an incredibly interesting and beautiful place to visit. It's also, incidentally, the home of Konrad Röntgen, and that name probably doesn't ring a bell, but if I tell you that X-rays in German are called Röntgenstrahlen, that gives you a clue. Konrad Röntgen invented the X-rays, or figured out what to do with X-rays. So you're in this city in Würzburg, and that's the home of the inventor of the X-rays. It also, for those of you that are into the NBA, it's the home of Dirk Nowitzki. And after Würzburg, we continue on to Bamberg. And as you can see in this image, Bamberg is again a quintessential German town with these beautiful half-timbered houses, with a spectacular cathedral, by the way, that you do not see in this image. This building here in the middle of that stream that runs through Bamberg, that is the city hall. And it's hard to imagine a prettier city hall. You only see one side of it. The other three sides are just as beautiful, and they're a little different also. This gives you a sense of what other parts of Bamberg look like. Like I said, you're kind of in storybook Germany at this point. And the next day, you wake up and you're going to be in Nuremberg. And this is an image of Nuremberg that shows you the medieval side. Nuremberg was a really important city during Renaissance times. It had an enormous influence over much of southern Germany. It was the city of Albrecht Dürer, one of the most famous artists of the Renaissance north of the Alps, probably the most famous. Also traveled, by the way, along the Rhine and the Main rivers and wrote about it. And it's quite an interesting chronicle, his if you will, his journal of that period. Nuremberg, of course, is also known as the city of the Nuremberg trials. During the 20th century, Adolf Hitler made Nuremberg one of the most important cities of the Third Reich. He had enormous rallies there, and what is left of the rally grounds can be visited. The courthouse where the Nuremberg trials took place can be visited, and as long as there are no, as long as the court is not in session, we can take you inside and you can see that room. It's still a functioning courthouse, so it's not always possible, but if it is, then we have a tour that visits the Nuremberg courthouse, and that focuses very much on those black pages of Nuremberg's history that kind of started in 1933 and lasted until the end of World War II and the subsequent trials. And this gives you a bit of an idea now of what the trials were like. It's a little story about them.
In 1945, at Nuremberg's Hall of Justice, Allied powers gathered, seeking accountability. Today, Courtroom 600 is one of the most visited sites in the city.
You come to the building, you walk through the door, and you come into this courtroom. It really hits you. This is the place where international justice was spoken for the first time.
In the wake of World War II's devastation, the world sought answers and found them in Nuremberg.
The accused were sitting here. People like Hermann Göring, right here in that corner. Next to him, Rudolf Hess, Ribbentrop, Albert Speer, Julius Streicher, people from the armed forces.
With the world watching, the Allies knew a fair trial was critical, and so they methodically, in painstaking detail, laid out layer upon layer of evidence.
After almost 1 year, they came to Judgment Day. 12 received a death sentence, 3 acquittals, and the rest received long-term imprisonment or life-term imprisonment and were sent then to this specific prison in Berlin-Spandau.
Ultimately, the trials created a powerful framework for judging future wars, as Nuremberg was a radical departure in the method of assessing responsibility and assigning relevant punishment.
Normally they say the government acted and not the people inside. This was the first time where they said, no, not a government acts, the people are acting. And that people within a government were made accountable Without Nuremberg, there would be no UN Criminal High Court and trials against people in Rwanda, against Milosevic from Yugoslavia. Then this makes it a very important place.
Perhaps the chief US prosecutor, Robert H. Jackson, said it best. If we can cultivate in the world the idea that aggressive war-making is the way to the prisoner's dock rather than the way to honours, we will have accomplished something towards making peace more secure.
We then move on to Regensburg, and Regensburg is a it's a gem on the Danube. We've now shifted rivers again. Between Nuremberg and Regensburg, you travel on the Rhine-Main-Danube Canal that connects the Main, and therefore the Rhine, with the Danube, and that allows us to travel clear across Europe from the North Sea to the Black Sea. We don't do that on this itinerary, but you have that possibility to go all the way. And Regensburg has thousands of years of history. If you look in the image here on the that stone bridge that you see on the left-hand side of the picture is one of the oldest bridges in Germany that spans the Danube River. Of course, there are legends about the bridge, and there are legends about the cathedral. It's a city where you find layer upon layer upon layer of history. The other really interesting thing in Regensburg is that they have their own form of the bratwurst. They're relatively small sausages, and if you look at that tower that's next to the bridge, just kind of to the, you can't see it in this image, but just to the left of that tower is one of Germany's very oldest restaurants that still serves bratwurst pretty much the same way it did 500-600 years ago. This gives you another view of Regensburg, an aerial view. What's really interesting here is the Gothic tower that you can see just below the cathedral. It says pinkish building, and Regensburg is known for this. It's an import from Italy, and you've all seen these in images or when you traveled there. Italy has these cities that have these tall towers where whole families live together, and they were, you know, for prestigious families. The taller the tower, the more money the family had. And Regensburg, because it was such an important city already in medieval times, was one of the first to adopt all the new fashions that came from Renaissance Italy. And that's where you see these towers emerge in the city. From Regensburg, you have an option to travel to another great city in southern Germany. This is Munich. It's an optional excursion that takes you all day, and that highlights those things that Munich is really well known for. This is an image that shows you the main square with City Hall. Obviously, that's just one of very many buildings in Munich that are worth a visit and that are part of this tour. In the background there, you see the Frauenkirche, which is kind of the iconic great church of Munich. The next day finds you then in Passau, and Passau sits almost on the border to Austria. Passau is an old bishopric, and in the background, that cathedral that you see with those domes, those three domes, that is the Grand Cathedral of Passau. It's also from here that you have the option, and that depends a little bit on the weather, because you have to have good weather to fly to Neuschwanstein. And you may say, well, wait a minute, that looks like Cinderella's castle. That's a Walt Disney ripoff. It's actually the other way around. This castle was built by Mad King Ludwig of Bavaria, who built a number of these very pretty fairy tale-like castles. And he was not a medieval ruler. He was 18th century. And he read a lot of history books, and he loved them, and he loved medieval times. And so he came up with these fanciful buildings that look like they're part of maybe a novel of knights and damsels in distress from the Middle Ages, but in fact they were a little older, and they were quite fanciful. But they are in the most beautiful locations all over Bavaria that you could possibly find. And then from Passau we continue on through the Danube, through Austria. This is Melk Abbey. And I mentioned this earlier. Melk Abbey is the city, or is the abbey with the beautiful library, with the beautiful sculptures in the church itself, with the beautiful frescoes on the ceiling. And you will find that throughout the Wachau Valley, there are quite a number of these buildings. And a few years ago, we worked with the monks at Göttwijk Abbey to come up with a special program, because we felt that Göttwijk still had the opportunity for us to create something that was very uniquely Viking. And through a lot of work with them, we came up with a behind-the-scenes look of a working abbey. Where in many parts of the world, these abbeys are now kind of relics of an ancient past. In Austria, they still really have an important function to fulfill. And we take you to Göttwijk on an optional excursion that gives you a look behind the scenes, not without also taking you to see the beauty of the Grand Abbey buildings, the staircases, the ceiling frescoes. This gives you an idea of some of the things that the Wachau Valley is really well known for. And these, of course, are the vineyards, the little villages that you see in the background, the steep cliffs that were perfect for little castles. And not far from where this picture was taken, Viking's very own vintner grows his grapes, produces Grüner Veltliner and other wines that we serve on the ship and that we have done for a very long time. And there's a little video that will introduce you to him.
Along the picturesque Danube River, in the scenic Wachau Valley, you'll find the family-run Mörwald Winery, where vintner Erhard Mörwald creates the award-winning vintages found on Vikings' European ships.
We're in the cellars of the Mörwald Winery, and we're here with Mr. Mörwald himself, who is going to tell us a bit about the wines that we serve on board. We have a white wine and a red wine, and the white wine is a Grüner Veltliner.
Grüner Veltliner, ja.
Und das ist die Traube, ja?
Das ist die Traubensorte, ja.
Yeah, and that is actually also the name of the grape type. Okay, we'll taste a little bit.
Hat eine sehr schöne Farbe.
Yes, it has a very nice color.
Riecht ausgezeichnet, einen guten Duft.
It smells lovely. Wollen Sie probieren?
Probieren wir mal. Der Wein passt gut zum Fleischgerichten, zum Fischgericht oder ein typisches Wiener Schnitzel.
So he says that this wine goes very well with fish, meat and the Wiener Schnitzel.
Das ist unser Rotwein, ein blauer Zweigelt, typischer österreichischer Rotwein.
So this is the red wine. It is a typical Austrian red wine called the Blauer Zweigelt.
Das ist ein sehr kräftiger, fruchtiger Rotwein.
This is a full-bodied, fruity red wine.
Zum Wohle, Prost. Das ist ein sehr guter Essensbegleiter für dunkles Fleisch oder für Wildgerichte.
He says it's a very good red wine for darker meats or game.
Ich würde ihn auch ganz gut für Hartkäse empfehlen.
And it's also quite good for hard cheeses, not soft cheeses.
Genau. Probier.
Prost.
Enjoy the distinctive character of Mörwald wines for yourselves, only on board the ships of Viking river cruises, bringing local tastes and flavors to the waterways of Europe.
Okay, and then as the ship moves on, this is a ship passing the village of Dürnstein in the Wachau Valley. Eventually then we get to Vienna, where you will have 2 full days to experience the entire spectrum of grand, beautiful, interesting things that Vienna has to offer. This is an image of Schönbrunn Palace, and if you're there in Vienna at the time when the Vienna Boys Choir is there and when we have an opportunity to bring you behind the scenes, then you may get a bit of an introduction or an idea of what this video has to show you in real life.
1, 2, 3, up!
Witnessing the boys rehearsing before their evening performance is like listening to a choir of angels. Established by the Habsburg Empire in 1498, the Vienna Boys Choir provides a solid education and a chance to explore different countries.
The greatest part of being a member is probably going on tour the whole world.
Through the concerts, the boys gain perspective and self-confidence.
When I walk out on stage, I just feel free, hearing the applause from everybody. Yeah, it feels great.
In all, there are approximately 100 members from countries around the globe.
Ron, how long have you been here?
2 years.
2 years. Yeah. And you came from
St. Petersburg.
St. Petersburg. We heard you singing earlier and it was absolutely beautiful. Your parents must be very proud.
Yeah, I think so.
With a thorough musical background in hand, many boys eventually become professional vocalists and treasure their days in the choir.
They think back to their past and remember that they were a member and then think, I've had the best past that I could have ever had.
Viking river cruises, sharing privileged access to the culture of Europe.
So the Vienna Boys Choir offer is privileged access, no doubt about it. It's not always possible. We have to work with the boys choir to take you behind the scenes and to introduce you to the young singers. On the other hand, this is something that you can do every day as often as you like. This is an image of the famous Sachertorte, a chocolate cake with a very thin, very elegant layer of apricot jam. But again, we can show this to you in moving images that tell that story a lot better, and maybe you can imagine a little bit of the flavor and a little bit of the scent of the chocolate cake with apricot jam.
The year was 1832. Vienna was thriving with the Austrian Empire in full bloom under Emperor Francis I. The graceful waltz and composer Johann Strauss Sr. had captured the Viennese imagination. And a new taste was born when Prince Wenzel von Metternich demanded a special dessert for an important function. Through a twist of fate, the imposing task fell upon the shoulders of a young apprentice, Franz Sacher. Toiling feverishly, he concocted a delectable combination of chocolate, apricot jam, and whipped cream, the Sachertorte, which, it's said, delighted Metternich's guests. In 1876, son Edward Sacher built upon his father's reputation, opening Vienna's exclusive, luxurious Hotel Sacher. After World War II, the hotel fell into Russian, then British hands during the occupation, before the family restored its beauty and traditions, including one that might surprise you: special treatment for dog guests. The policy began long ago with owner Anna Sacher, who always had her dogs close by. Of course, many human faces have also been greeted warmly into these opulent surroundings. Hotel Sacher feels like a living museum, a fascinating time capsule of country and culture, where every wall speaks volumes about the intriguing past that unfolded here. Even in the cafe, which also happens to be the perfect spot to experience history with your taste buds. The Sachertorte, with its secret recipe that's still made almost entirely by hand. Hotel Sacher is a rare treasure and a reminder of the many wonders just waiting to be explored in Vienna.
So cafes are an enormous part of Viennese culture. On guided shore excursions, we can take you inside, and as soon as we can, we will help you find your own way and have a little bit of freedom to explore on your own. Again, as soon as that is safe to do so. This is the Hofburg in Vienna, and this is just one. You can take so many of these images in Vienna that have these grand public buildings. We showed you at the very beginning the library. That's actually just on the other side of this particular building, the National Library. This is the Hofburg Palace, and not far from this complex is the Spanish Riding School. And we have a little video there too to show you what that is all like behind the scenes.
Welcome to a world of elegance, discipline and remarkable skill.
We're backstage at the Spanish Riding School with the world-famous Lipizzaner horses. Whether you like horses or not, this is really a lifetime experience.
The powerful Lipizzans in the hands of their skilled trainers and riders spend significant time learning and practicing together, forming an unshakable bond between horse and rider along the way.
We don't see our stallions as horses, we see our stallions as partners, and we want to work together with them. You know, the horse is first in every meaning. That is our philosophy, that is our way of treating horses.
The performing Lipizzanas are all stallions. Their coat is gleaming white. But did you know they're actually black for the first 6 to 9 years of their lives?
They start to perform with the age of 10, after 6 years of training.
Many Lipizzana stallions have long careers in this unique environment of caring and companionship, with some performing well into their 20s.
The work with the Lipizzan stallions, there's nothing compared to it.
These noble creatures possess a rare combination of beauty and strength, temperament and intelligence, and the stallions have been synonymous with Vienna for over 400 years.
This is Pluto, my new friend, and this is truly an experience of a lifetime.
Viking river cruises sharing privileged access to the culture of Vienna.
And finally, after 2 weeks of traveling along the rivers of Europe, we will bring you to Budapest. Budapest happens to be the home, the city where he was born and the city where he passed away, of Imre Kertész, the Hungarian Nobel Prize-winning author. That really fits into your stack of books that you will want to read before you get going on the Grand European Tour, and one of the authors that we need to endorse during our literature week. Imre Kertész is probably the greatest Hungarian author. He's also chronicling his life before, during, and after World War II. In Budapest, we have a myriad different ways of showing you the city on foot. We use some public transportation. We have coach transportation to just give you as broad an overview as we possibly can of this wonderful city that sits on both sides of the Danube. You'll see images here. This is, for instance, on the right bank, and the market is on the left bank. And we should close also with a video that shows you a little bit more about the different things that you can experience in Budapest.
Budapest, once hidden behind the Iron Curtain, is a delight for the senses.
Budapest is known as the Pearl of the Danube, and there's so much beauty to see in this city, but this must be the best place to start your exploration.
Fisherman's Bastion, perched high above the Danube, was built in 1895. It has 7 towers to honor the area's 7 original tribes and offers phenomenal views. Budapest's Great Market Hall dates to 1896. It's a literal and figurative feast with bursts of color and temptations everywhere you look, and a treasure loved by both tourists and the locals. Millennium Memorial, also known as Hero Square, is a grand monument and home to a collection of imposing sculptures of the Magyar chieftains who founded Hungary in the 9th century. A somber stop, but one well worth making, is at the Shoes on the Danube, where 60 pairs of iron shoes provide an enduring memorial to the victims shot into the Danube at the end of World War II. And behind this grand facade is something really special. The Sydney Thermal Baths, a complete wellness center which has operated on the site since 1881.
I can think of no better way to start or end your stay here in Budapest than at the thermal baths. I think I may just spend the entire day here. We can't wait to share Viking's real Budapest with you. See you soon. Viszlát!
Okay, and we're almost done. What I should mention is that at the end of your cruise, you do have the option to extend a few nights in Budapest or to travel with us to Prague for 3 nights in that city, the city of 100 spires, where you can have an experience. Prague is, again, one of those, probably, you know, if you look at the great capitals of Central Europe, it's really Vienna on this cruise, Budapest on this cruise, and Prague that you can book as an extension. And then you really have the three, in my mind, the 3 best cities of Central Europe in one travel experience. So that covers the Grand European Tour. And as always, now I'm ready to answer questions, and that means that Heather will enter the scene.
Hi, Joost.
Hi, Heather.
Our first question tonight comes from Gary in Illinois. And he says, can you tell us your thoughts on the different directions of travel? Is Amsterdam to Budapest or Budapest to Amsterdam a better direction to sail in?
I always get asked that question, and it's a really tough one to answer. There's something to say for traveling downriver. I think it's more of a story. The interesting thing with the Grand Euro is that you travel downriver from Nuremberg south. So from Nuremberg to Budapest, you travel downriver, but you travel upriver from Amsterdam to Nuremberg. So it's kind of half and half. This one is really a difficult call. I think what I would do is, if I had to make a choice, it would probably be Amsterdam, Budapest in this case, just because then I have Prague at the end, and Prague is such a highlight. But now I have to caution you, because it was a personal question. And in my mind, of course, being from the Netherlands, Amsterdam is kind of like, well, then I'm back home. You know, Amsterdam to me is kind of a city that's just around the corner from where I grew up. So it's not as big of a highlight as is Prague. This is a tough one. I would say I would let this much more depend on when you're ready to travel and not worry so much about the direction.
Thank you, Joost. Our next question comes from Elisa in Norfolk, and she says, can you tell us, how do the Rhine and Danube rivers differ?
Yes, how do the Rhine and Danube rivers differ? So the Rhine is a relatively short river, and if you look at a map, it's a very straight river. And there are lots of large cities on the Rhine. So the exciting part about the Rhine is that you sometimes feel like you're on a on somewhat of a water highway. There's a lot of traffic. There's a lot to see. There's a lot to do along the river. You will see all kinds of different ships. There's even like little booklets that you can pick up in some of the ports along the way that tells you the different types of ships that you see there. The Danube, especially in Germany, it picks up a little bit of speed and it picks up a little bit of traffic in Austria. But that first stretch of the Danube is really kind of a lazy river that goes around these bends, and it has a very different character. It's also a lot more rural. It travels through a part of the world that is not as densely populated as the Rhine is.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Florence, and she says, can you tell us a bit about what it is like sailing through the main Danube Canal? How long does this take, and is any commentary provided? She says, my husband is an engineer and is very interested to learn more about how this works.
Okay, so yes. So it is an engineering marvel. You go through some of the deepest locks, and I'm saying deepest because that's what it will feel like when you're at the bottom of the lock. Some of the deepest locks that you could travel through on any river in Europe. And it is, yes, it is narrated. The trick, though, is that part of the passage happens probably during the very early morning hours or late evening hours. But but it is actually something that is worth staying up late for or getting up early for. So it depends a little bit if this is really not. So this is, I'm going back now to an earlier question. If you really want to see the canal in action, make sure that you book it in the right direction. And off the top of my head, this is really something that you would need to ask in the call center, because I would have to right now look up the exact cruise schedule. But I'm fairly certain that there's one way where it's later in the evening and one where it's earlier in the morning, where you travel through some of the really, the coolest locks, the most beautiful locks are just as you leave Nuremberg when you travel towards Budapest, or just before you get to Nuremberg when you travel to Amsterdam. So when you leave Nuremberg, so yeah, that's how it works. When you leave Nuremberg, it's late in the evening. When you arrive in Nuremberg, it's early in the morning. And you can always ask your program director if there is no commentary, because it might be a little early in the morning. If there's no commentary running, you can always ask. Either the captains all know what they're going through. They will have a lot of technical know-how, and you just find the program director and you say, hey, you know, I really want to understand what's going on here, and they'll be more than happy to do that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joost. That's very helpful. Our next question comes from Elsie in the United States, and she says, can you tell us a bit about the evenings on board? She says, we have travelled on an ocean cruise with Viking, but not done a river cruise. What is the entertainment like?
Okay, so the entertainment, the river ships obviously are a lot smaller. What you have in the evenings are quite often lectures by local people that really understand the area. We also bring local entertainment on board, and that can be, we have a glass blower, for instance, who comes on board, who shows how he makes things, and he's incredibly entertaining. He sets up shop right in the lounge. We have some local entertainment, musical entertainment. There are quite a number of things. What you have to keep in the back of your head is that when we dock in port, we would much rather have you spend some time ashore, and this is why we organize these evening excursions, than on the ship. You know, again, as much time as we have in port, we want you to explore the local life and the local culture. It's also, a river ship is smaller, so it's not that easy to bring local culture onto the ship. And in many places, it's really easy to take you to where the culture happens and where it's made.
Thank you, Joost. Our next question comes from Clover in the United States, and she says, which of the optional excursions in Vienna would you most recommend? She says, with 2 days, it seems like we should be able to fit quite a lot in.
Yes. 2 days allow you to do virtually everything. So Schönbrunn, you have to do Schönbrunn. That's a must. You should do the concert. And I would probably, for an evening, I would also go to the Heurigen, which is, you know, it's again rubbing elbows with locals. Heurigen are places where they serve the wine. They're wine cafes, if you will, and they can only serve their own wine. There are very strict rules as to what you can and cannot do when it comes to producing and then selling wine in Austria. And that has led to a tradition that's hundreds of years old, where a farmer just basically sets up a small little restaurant on his property, where then he sells the wine that he produces.
Thank you, Joost.
Those are the musts, I think.
Wonderful. Our next question comes from Una in Chicago, and she says, being Dutch yourself, can you give us your insider tips for the Amsterdam pre-cruise extension?
Yes, of course. Okay, so you have a good 2 days. The first thing is the walk, if you can, but also get yourself a tram pass. Most North Americans are not that used, depending on where you live. If you're in New York, this is a piece of cake. If you live in other parts of the country, you're not that used to public transportation, but that is the way to get around in Amsterdam. Do a lot of walking, get a tram pass for the day, and that allows you to, to travel from A to B when you get a little tired. I would not recommend jumping on a bicycle. That sounds very enticing, and a lot of people do it, but you have to keep in mind that Amsterdam is a city where the Dutch live and work, and the Dutch do everything on a bicycle. And chances are they're going to be a lot better at it than you and a lot faster. And the Dutch don't always have patience for people that haven't ridden their bicycles in 40 years. So keep that in the back of your head. There are other places. Kinderdijk is beautiful. Hop on a bicycle there. Don't do it in Amsterdam. Use your legs, use local transportation, and then you would go and visit the Rijksmuseum. I think that's, that would be probably near the top of my list. If you are a big fan, the Van Gogh is not to be missed. Let's see what else. Stay away, I would say, from the from the part of town that's immediately across the train station. That is like the most touristy part of town, not the most interesting. Find your way a little bit. Amsterdam has these concentric circles of canals, and that's where you want to end up, and just walk the canals. What I would do is walk one of those circles, because they will take you through residential areas with smaller houses, beautiful grand homes. You'll walk by the home of the mayor of Amsterdam. There are some small museums in these houses. That's how I would spend my time. Let's see, you need to eat somewhere. So go to a restaurant called Greetje, Greetje, and then don't have dessert there, but go for another walk and go to it Papeneiland, 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 and have your glass of jenever there. There was a picture of it earlier in the slideshow. And that's where you have a piece of apple cake. Leave room for the apple cake because it's very large. Yeah, that's good enough. And now you have some time to fill in yourself as well.
Thank you, Joost. That's brilliant. Our next question comes from Hayley in Canada, and she says, can you visit the Christmas markets on this itinerary? And which cities have the best markets?
Okay. So yes, but you need to book it relatively late in season. So if your focus is on Christmas market, I would probably lean a little bit more towards the shorter cruises on the Rhine and on the Danube. But if you can find a cruise at the end of the cruising season, Nuremberg has great Christmas markets. Regensburg, Passau, Vienna. So it's all pretty much in the southern. Oh, and Cologne, of course. Cologne has brilliant Christmas markets as well. Cologne has like 4 of them. So, oh, and Würzburg. Würzburg is a really good one too. Most of the mid-sized and somewhat larger cities have really good Christmas markets.
Brilliant, thank you. Next question here is from Damon in the United States, and he says, what is the best currency for this trip? Do all of the countries you visit use the euro?
All with the exception of Hungary. And even in Hungary, they will take the euro instead of the forint, although officially the currency there is the forint. But everywhere else you can pay with euros.
Perfect, thank you. Our next question is from Helen in Orlando, and she says, where is the best place to try authentic German sausages?
Nuremberg has the Nuremberg sausages. Regensburg has the Regensburg sausages. And Passau has what you probably think of when you think of bratwursts. And then, because the question was not just bratwurst, it was sausages in general. So in Bavaria, around Munich, you also have the opportunity to try white sausage. White sausages are boiled, they're not grilled, and you don't eat those for lunch or for dinner. They're breakfast sausages, but they come boiled. And those are things that you also need to try. If you're into sausages, you have to have a Weisswurst, white sausage.
Brilliant, thank you. Joseph in Texas says, I love the idea of climbing to the top of Cologne Cathedral, but I'm not sure if I would manage it. How fit do you need to be? And can you tell us what the view is like from the top?
The view from the top is spectacular. The view inside the cathedral is also spectacular, inside and then looking down. You do need to be fit to do this. And that's not so much the bit on the roof of the cathedral itself. It's really to get inside the cathedral. There are galleries that are a little narrow. You need to push your way through some very narrow passages. And in order to get to the very top of the roof, you also need to walk up a set of cast iron stairs. So there's some stair walking involved. This is really something that you should only do if you're fit.
Great, thank you, Joost. Margaret in Kingfield says, what's best to pack for a summer cruise? Can it still get chilly in the evenings on board?
Yep, it can sometimes still get chilly, but not too chilly. So a sweater will do. And always bring a rain jacket, because you never know. There is no rainy season in this part of Europe. You have a little bit of rain sprinkled through the entire year. So, yeah.
Great.
Nippy also in the morning sometimes, and you have to be on deck in the morning. It is the best time of day. On the aquavit terrace with a cup of coffee. Yeah, and then you need a sweater because you're going to be sitting a little bit like this. And that's the best part of the day. It really is. Sorry, get carried away.
Thank you, guys. That's great. Our next question is from Tess in Alberta, and she says, I've recently become a vegetarian and I'm interested in the onboard food choices as well as what local specialities I should try. Are there any particular cheeses, pastries or cakes that I should look out for?
Cheeses, pastries and cakes. Yes, of course, a lot of it. Now on board you have vegetarian options. And I have been with Viking for so long that I remember the days when vegetarian options were basically the very same dish without meat. And of course, we, as the rest of the world, have progressed to have really interesting, inspired vegetarian dishes. But the question is really also about pastries and cakes and cheeses. There's really too many to try. In Budapest, you have to try vlotny. In the Jewish Quarter, it's Flodni, vlotny. That's my favorite. It's a layer of poppy seed, it's a layer of nuts, and it's a layer of raisins. It's very, very dense, and it's brilliant. In Vienna, of course, you try Sachertorte, but also a cake called Fächertorte and cheesecake. German cheesecake, baked cheesecake, is not like American cheesecake. It's a little fluffier. It's made with quark, not cream cheese, and quark is kind of a cheese that's a little bit more tangy, and you taste that in the baked cheesecake. This is a perfect cruise to gain a few pounds with your pastries. Yeah.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you, Joost. Our next question is from Rod in Denver, and he says, we're booked for 2022 and looking forward to seeing all the castles along the Rhine. Can you tell us how long is this section of the river? Roughly how many castles will we see, and will there be a guide on board to point them all out and tell us about them?
So the last one is yes. The program director will point out every one of the castles. And keep in mind, the Rhine has the most densely packed section of castles on the river, but the Main has quite a number of castles. The Danube has castles and castle ruins. Really, the stretch from Koblenz, and it starts just a little north of Koblenz, but from Koblenz on the Rhine all the way to Budapest, because there's even some castle ruins between Vienna and Budapest. It's spectacular scenery, and we will point out most of these castles. On the Rhine, there are a few dozen, and along the Main, they're a little bit more stretched out, and they tend to be a little smaller. But you'll have several castles every day that you pass by.
Wonderful, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Jessica in Austin says, I've seen on the website that Viking offer a premium option on the Amsterdam and Budapest extensions. Can you tell us a little bit more about this so we can decide if that might be worth doing?
Yes, so we bring you to a hotel normally on an extension that fits really well with your ship experience. And even on the ship, of course, we offer you various different options when it comes to your stateroom. If you lean more towards the somewhat larger staterooms where you have a little bit more space and maybe a balcony, a veranda, a wraparound veranda, in that case, we kind of duplicate these options in the extensions, where the hotel on the premium extensions is just a little nicer, just a little maybe a little bit more centrally located, and then the engagement is a little bit more in the sense that our standard extensions leave you a lot of freedom. The premium extensions have a little bit more engagement with the local guides, so there's a little bit more of a program in them. In both cases, we try to give people really good value for money. So it's really just what is most to your liking. And I would almost say, if you lean towards the higher cabin categories on the ship, you will want to try the premium package.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Christopher in North Carolina says, do you need a visa for any of the countries on this cruise?
You do not need a visa, but I'm assuming, Christopher, you are American or Canadian. Keep in the back of your head that if you are in the US, but your passport says that you're from a different country, we do advise you to contact the embassies of the countries that you travel through. America in particular is a country where so many people from all over the world live in the US and still hold on to their own passports. It's virtually impossible for us to know it all. But Americans don't need visas. If you have a different passport, just check, make sure.
Thank you. Caroline in Atlanta says, I love the idea of doing this cruise, but I'd also like to go further down the Eastern Danube. Is it possible to combine Viking's cruise that goes into Eastern Europe with this grand European tour?
Yes, we actually even have a cruise that does it already, but you can always call the call center and say, I want to combine this and that. You can mix and match. It's not commonly known, but you can get whatever you want. And yes, you can have this cruise that goes from Amsterdam all the way to Bucharest in Romania. Yeah, and then you really literally cross the entire continent.
Wonderful, thank you. Ian in Hindhead says, can you comment on the different excursions available at Kinderdijk? There are options to go by bike or by barge. Which would you recommend?
It depends a little bit on the weather, maybe. It depends on how fit you are. And it depends a little bit on what it is that you want. So on the barge, that's really a fairly exclusive experience. Walking is the easiest. Walking also is kind of the included excursion. The other two we charge a little bit of money for. I would lean, and it's a personal choice. I think what's really interesting about the barge is that you get to go to this windmill. It's a little different. It's one of the older windmills in Kinderdijk, and it's one that you can't see any other way. The other windmills that are open to the public, they're right on the road. They're very, very accessible. This one's not. So, I would tend towards that a little bit.
Thank you. Question from Amanda in Virginia. She says, in Budapest, I'd like to visit the thermal baths. Is this something Viking can arrange, and which are the best baths to visit?
We do it. We can. We not only can we arrange it, we actually do arrange it, and it depends a little bit on when you travel, where we have our arrangements. The Széchenyi baths that are usually in our videos. Those are our favorites. The Gellert baths are also sometimes are part of our program. Again, it depends a little bit on when exactly you travel, what was available for us when we booked all this, when we booked all the excursions. But those two would be the Széchenyi baths are probably because you have a lot of space in the outdoors. Are probably the best known and are really beautiful. They're made for, I would say, for a very broad audience. If you're someone, and Budapest, and I haven't mentioned this, but Budapest is a city that has incredible Art Nouveau architecture. And if you are into that style, and if you're into architecture at all, or in a serious way, the Gellert baths are magnificent examples of Art Nouveau architecture. So I'm a big fan of Art Nouveau architecture. So when I'm in Budapest, I go to the Gellert baths.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joost. And I think this is the last question we've got time for tonight. And it's also a comment. It comes from Bella in Great Falls. And she says, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. We're definitely going to book this cruise soon. She says, personally to you, what is it like being involved in creating these amazing itineraries? Do you get to meet everyone who does the shore excursions?
Well, we're now so large that I can't meet everyone, but it is the greatest job in the world. No, it's you know, being able to create experiences for a living is it's just silly, but it's an incredibly cool job, and I'm these days I'm trying to balance my time between, you know, making sure that other people can do this, can travel and create these experiences, and then every once in a while I still get very, very involved. I do believe that it is absolutely essential for someone in my role to sit on the bus, to go with local guides, to eat where our guests eat, and because you want to continue to have the experience that our guests have, to make sure that it still really fits. And frankly, I love traveling on the ships when I do this, because you get to meet the people that you design all this for, and that is incredibly important to continue to understand what people like, sometimes what they don't like. I mean, that's okay too. We create a lot of different experiences. I would say that there have been some that we needed to modify a little bit after we first tried them. But it's, yeah, I do go out as much as I can. I do meet guests as much as I can. And yeah, we do. And this goes, you know, I have a team of people that does this. We do take your experience very, very seriously. We do talk to the people that work with us. The perfect example is the Guttwijk Abbey, where we designed this program together with the monks. Pater Pius is someone that I still every once in a while have a chat with to see how things are going. He sends me an email. He's like, "Oh, we're so looking forward to, you know, hosting Viking guests again." And I'm like, "Oh, and how are things at the Abbey? You know, are you already harvesting grapes again in fall?" So yes, it's a very involved and a very engaged job. It's a perfect job for someone that said, "I want to travel when I grow up." It's a long answer, but you asked, so there it is.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Joost. I think that's all we've got time for tonight.
Thank you for watching, and we'll see you some other time.